Imagine thinking every college in the country rejected you, when in reality, you actually got in, but your stepdad was running a one-man postal service out of your mailbox. That was my life at 18. One random phone call exposed everything, and it flipped the whole story upside down. In this video, you'll see how I found out I was secretly accepted, what he did to bury those chances, and how I fought back. But before any of that, I had to survive the streak of rejections that made me think I'd failed completely. The streak of rejections. The first rejection hit hard, but I tried to shake it off. Everyone gets one, maybe two. I told myself it was part of the process, but then they just kept coming. A second, a third, and soon it was so routine I didn't even feel the drop in my stomach anymore. The emails blurred together, generic greetings, standardized apologies, and a sterile line that shut the door on each possibility. It felt less like a chance at the future, and more like I was refreshing a screen just to be told no in new fonts. By the time I opened my 10th, I was convinced I wasn't cut out for anything beyond sitting in my bedroom surrounded by leftover SAT prep books. What made it even harder was seeing how different things looked for everyone else at my school. Even classmates who barely passed exams were walking around already decked out in university hoodies. One friend of mine had submitted an essay comparing zodiac signs to dog breeds, and she still landed a spot somewhere respectable. Meanwhile, I had nothing. Watching people fold college-branded t-shirts into their graduation party decorations while I was left with double-digit rejections was its own type of punishment. My guidance counselor kept asking about my plans, and all I could do was force a smile. Inside, I felt like the last one standing in gym class after everyone else had been picked. There's one detail I left out until now, because at the time, I brushed it off. When I first made the email account I used for my applications, my stepdad helped me set it up, and he insisted he should know the password in case something happened. It seemed harmless at the time, but looking back, that small request connects to everything that followed. His attitude through the rejections has never stopped confusing me. One memory sticks the most. I had just gotten an email that confirmed yet another, "We regret to inform you," and before I could even close the laptop, he walked in. He leaned against my doorframe with this overly casual look and immediately launched into a speech comparing how much cheaper community college would be. He wasn't subtle. He sounded almost enthusiastic, like he'd been waiting to deliver that cost breakdown. Meanwhile, I sat there staring at the screen that had just told me no for the 11th time, wondering if he noticed the timing or just didn't care. What I couldn't figure out was how normal all of this rejection was starting to feel. At first, each email felt crushing, but after a while, it was like rolling dice that only had one outcome. The shock was gone. One click, one rejection. That became my routine. And every time I started sinking into disappointment, I had him in the background practically applauding the idea of staying local. It was so out of sync with the reality I was experiencing that it almost felt rehearsed. When nights got too heavy, I'd sit with a small pile of printed rejection letters. I thought maybe one day I'd use them as fuel, some kind of motivational evidence I had overcome. But under the dim glow of my desk lamp, they looked less like inspiration and more like a collection of verdicts. I wasn't a top student, but my grades were strong, my testing was above average, and my recommendations made me sound better than I gave myself credit for. That's what nagged at me quietly, the idea that I wasn't as hopeless as these results suggested. But because the only evidence in front of me screamed failure, I convinced myself I was delusional for holding out hope. And through all of that, my stepdad kept circling back to his favorite lecture points. Tuition numbers, savings comparisons, a mature choice. It shifted from encouragement to something more personal, like my letdowns were stepping stones toward his version of a win. He never seemed upset on my behalf, never once reflected my disappointment back at me. If anything, the more emails I lost, the brighter he seemed. I didn't dwell too much on the strangeness at the time. I told myself I was being bitter. But even then, something about his grin stuck with me. It didn't match the weight of what I was going through. It didn't look like someone trying to ease my pain. It looked like someone quietly satisfied with how well things were lining up. That contrast hovered in the back of my mind. I was exhausted from rejections, haunted by the idea that maybe I was never enough, and distracted by his oddly upbeat interruptions. None of it connected yet. I just knew that something about his cheerfulness didn't match the reality I was living. And that gap, that forced smile against my disappointment, was the first sign that rejection might not have been the whole story. His grin didn't add up, but I wouldn't understand why until one strange phone call revealed everything. The stepdad suspicious pep talks. My stepdad had a way of turning community college into the centerpiece of every conversation, like some personal campaign he'd been waiting years to launch. It wasn't casual, it wasn't supportive, it was delivered like a performance. After each rejection I sat through, he'd appear with speeches that sounded rehearsed, not comforting. He didn't just say it was a good option. He called it the smartest investment I could ever make, emphasizing that word as though he'd uncovered some hidden treasure. At first, I tried to shrug it off as practicality. Maybe he just didn't see the point in expensive universities. But the more he repeated it, the more unnatural it felt. The delivery was too polished, too animated, like he wanted me to buy into an idea, not just consider advice. One evening, I was slouched at the dinner table when he leaned forward and declared, "Community college keeps your options open, keeps costs low, and keeps you close to home." It was less like guidance and more like a scripted line. By then, I had stopped listening to the words and started noticing the energy behind them. That strange enthusiasm didn't match the situation of seeing me fail over and over. It looked more like he was trying to redirect every outcome toward one single track. He brought it up everywhere. If I mentioned a friend prepping to move into a dorm, he'd remind me how much money I'd save skipping furniture. If we drove past a billboard for a university, he'd sigh about how tuition was basically theft. Small reminders, constant prodding. It wasn't advice once in a while, it was an ongoing campaign built into every normal moment of life. And the strangest part was how it never faded with time, never softened into empathy like you'd expect from a parent who sees you struggle. One time he even came to me with a stack of research. Real numbers, printed out and stapled together like he was preparing for a debate. He laid tuition comparisons on the table, credit hour breakdowns, yearly totals, projected savings compared against 4-year schools. He spoke with this deliberate satisfaction, pointing at the totals like a lawyer brandishing proof. "See," he said, "half the price for the exact same first 2 years." His grin looked less like encouragement and more like someone winning an argument. That was the moment the feeling solidified. This wasn't about supporting me. This was deliberate steering. That shift unsettled me. Parents normally encourage dreams bigger than their kids believe possible. Even when unrealistic, they want their child aiming higher, stretching out. But with him, it was the opposite. He wasn't pushing upward, he was pushing down, and he looked thrilled doing it. That excitement didn't match his role in my life. It wasn't about a student making a mature choice, it was about him trying to lock me into a track where his preference won. When someone that invested stands in front of you with printer receipts, it stops being advice. It starts looking like a plan. The hardest part wasn't even the content of his pep talks. It was the way he delivered them so close to each rejection. There was no time to feel the loss before he reframed it as destiny. Rejections weren't just setbacks. To him, they were signs guiding me toward the outcome he already picked out. It came across as strangely celebratory, the way he wove rejection straight into the narrative he wanted me to accept. Instead of room to process disappointment, I got staged optimism layered over my failures. I kept trying to file it away as financial concern. Sure, maybe he thought saving money was the best long-term answer for our family. But the intensity never fit that logic. He wasn't just relieved about reduced debt. He was glowing. He smiled too wide when speaking about cutting my future down to something smaller, as if that meant he'd accomplished something. That excess of energy planted the thought I couldn't shake. Why did he care this much about ensuring I chose the cheaper road? I didn't ask him directly, but I carried the question. I watched closer when he slipped community college into conversation. I noticed the way he looked at me when talking about tuition. And I couldn't shake the sense that his motivation wasn't as simple as money. His constant pep talks weren't neutral guidance. They were redirection with conviction. The push to shrink my path felt designed, almost as though it served him more than me. That steady pressure eroded my confidence in my own choices. Every time I wanted to push back, I stopped myself because I couldn't explain why it bothered me so deeply. To anyone else, it might have. Sounded like practical parenting, but I was living with it daily, and the pattern wasn't just encouragement. It was control. One-sided control, disguised as advice, repeated so often it started to drown out other possibilities. Looking back, it was clear his pep talks were only about making me feel better. They were about narrowing every option until the only one left was the one he approved of. That pressure grew into a quiet suspicion, something I couldn't define, but couldn't let go of either. He wasn't simply rooting for community college. He was determined to eliminate every other door. That suspicion would stay with me, quietly growing. And I didn't realize how much it mattered until something I never expected cut through all the noise. Out of nowhere, I got interrupted, not by another speech, but by a call that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with me. The phone call that changed everything. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and at first I considered ignoring it. The number wasn't in my contacts, and usually mystery calls meant spam or distant relatives who needed tech support. But something made me press accept. I honestly thought it would be quick, probably annoying, and definitely forgettable. I didn't know it was about to upend months of what I thought was reality. The voice was calm, professional. A woman introduced herself as an admissions officer from a university I had applied to. For a moment, I assumed she dialed the wrong number. Colleges weren't supposed to be calling me. I'd already stacked rejections in double digits and built my identity around being the kid who got turned down everywhere. I sat frozen, listening as she asked, almost casually, whether I had decided to accept the offer they'd extended. I couldn't process what she just said. I asked her to explain, thinking I misheard, but she repeated it with the kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for interpretation. She wanted to confirm whether I planned to claim my admission spot. My chest tightened. The word spot echoed in my ears. I blurted out a question, stumbled, asked her again if she was sure she had the right person, but she was steady and polite. According to their records, I had been admitted months ago, and they were surprised not to have seen any response. That's when she added the part that knocked the wind out of me even harder. She said the deadline to confirm had already passed, 1 week ago, exactly. The school had tried reaching me multiple times by email and mail, and when nothing came back, this call was their courtesy follow-up. She even mentioned that in certain situations, late replies could be considered. But she said it like an exception, not something to count on. I gripped my phone and stammered out questions. I needed to be sure this wasn't a mix-up. I asked her details about my application, the major I listed, specifics only I would have included. She had every answer, every piece lined up perfectly. There was no mistake. This was my file, my acceptance, not a random coincidence. The word accepted rushed through my brain like an electrical surge. I sat on the edge of my bed in silence, trying not to laugh out of disbelief. Months of thinking I was a total failure, swallowed in rejection, and here was proof I had actually been wanted. All of that pain, all of that doubt felt suddenly built on sand, but confusion quickly replaced any relief. If they had emailed and mailed letters, why hadn't I seen a thing? Not once had I opened my inbox to a subject line with congratulations. Not a single letter had turned up in the stack of mail I'd seen at home. It was as if someone had decided I didn't deserve to know and made sure I never would. I thanked her softly, promised I would do whatever I could to follow up, then ended the call. My hands stayed clenched around the phone like I couldn't trust it. I walked out into the hallway pale, and my mom looked up as if she thought I'd just gotten tragic news instead of life-changing opportunity. I didn't explain. I went straight back into my room, shut the door, and stared at my laptop like it might answer me. 100 theories ran through my head. Maybe something was wrong with my inbox. Maybe emails were misfiled or deleted by accident. Mail could get lost occasionally, but every explanation fell apart the more I repeated it. Missing one message? Understandable. Even two? Possibly bad luck. But missing several from multiple schools with both digital and physical versions felt almost impossible. That's when I found myself circling back to uncomfortable questions. Someone had always been quick to grab the mail before me. Someone had insisted on holding onto the password for the email account for emergencies. Someone had seemed just a little too prepared with pep talks every single time rejection landed. Connecting those dots made my stomach twist. I shook off the suspicion as best I could. Nobody planned something this manipulative for. Your own kid, right? It sounded paranoid, even in my head. But the cracks were too sharp to ignore. If those letters and emails had reached the house, and I had never seen them, then someone else had. Someone had acted as a wall between me and the truth. The revelation left me restless. I couldn't stay still. My pulse wouldn't slow down. Logic screamed that this wasn't just bad luck with technology. Every instinct pushed me toward the same conclusion that something or someone had filtered out the good news before it could reach me. I pulled my chair closer to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the account I thought I already knew inside and out. I was done guessing. The call hadn't just revealed an acceptance I didn't know about. It had opened the possibility that months of failure had been manufactured in front of me. I had to see with my own eyes what was buried in that inbox. And with my screen glowing back at me, I prepared myself to search every corner, every folder, every setting to uncover whether the future I thought was gone had been hidden on purpose. The digital crime scene. I opened my inbox and stared at it as if it were evidence taped off behind police lines. What I had just been told on the phone made the screen more than a place for spam and school updates. It felt like the scene of tampering. Clicking through suddenly wasn't routine anymore. Each folder became a drawer I needed to pull open carefully, each setting a lock that might reveal exactly how my reality had been bent out of shape. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Rejections, ads, and clutter. But something about the order nagged at me. I had never been the type to set up complicated filters or labels, yet little trails of them were sitting there, almost invisible. That was the first signal someone else had arranged things in a way I would never have bothered with. When I went into the actual settings, it stopped being a suspicion. I scrolled to the filter section, and my stomach tightened before I even opened one. Filters don't create themselves. Someone had built these intentionally. The first one I clicked made me whisper the word out loud, almost in disbelief. Congratulations. That's what was written there. Any email with that word in the subject automatically sent to trash. Another filter queued up messages containing accepted. Another for offer of admission. They weren't hidden behind generic labels. They were written in full, crystal clear, each keyword like a neon sign pointing to this sabotage. If you're listening and this makes you anxious, check your own account filters and trash folder first. It takes less than a minute, and it could save you from missing something important. Back in that moment, staring at my own screen, the realization slammed into me. This wasn't an error or some random Gmail quirk. Someone had scripted my email to treat good news like hazardous waste. I scrolled down the list again, just to be sure no part of it was an accident. Line after line confirmed the pattern. Anything that looked like success was flagged and erased before I could ever see it. The next step was obvious. I opened the trash folder. It was like finding hidden files in a locked drawer, except this time, the drawer had been sitting inside my computer all along. There they were, actual acceptance emails from universities. One subject line began with the word I'd been craving for months, the one I'd convinced myself would never appear. Congratulations on your admission. Another, from a different school, carried, you have been accepted. A scholarship notification was buried there too, unopened. Some messages were marked as read, others unopened, but all dumped and left to disappear with the rest of the junk. It was shocking not only because of what it meant, but also because of the precision behind it. He hadn't simply guessed at my accounts or skimmed random messages. He had typed out exact words, the obvious markers of acceptance, and set them to self-destruct. It was deliberate, and it was meticulous. I sat back for a moment, trying to picture the effort this must have taken. He had logged on, gone into advanced settings, created filters line by line, tested them, and left them humming quietly in the background, while I lived day to day, believing I'd been rejected by everyone. Who puts that kind of energy into tearing down their own kid's future? The discarded offers mocked me as I scrolled further. Each one represented an alternate timeline. Schools I should have celebrated, opportunities one could have pursued. Instead, they had been left to expire in the trash, hidden under a layer of digital dust. My stomach felt heavy, not only from betrayal, but also from how all-encompassing the trick had been. I had pinned my future decisions and emotional state on what I thought was bad luck. In reality, the outcome had been designed before I ever logged in. I couldn't stop thinking about the psychological side of it. I had spent weeks comparing myself to classmates, imagining I was uniquely unworthy. That feeling had shaped how I carried myself, how I answered questions from teachers, even how I saw my own capability. And all of it was false, crafted by a filter system built to erase any chance of me discovering that I was, in fact, wanted by several schools. Looking at those settings felt like reading a confession note, only typed out in sterile Gmail menus. There was nothing messy or impulsive about it. It was calm, structured, and thorough. That made it worse. The anger came next. Nights spent agonizing over rejections were never mine to carry. They were planted. Every pep talk he had given me about community college suddenly sounded less like encouragement and more like a script designed to keep me from questioning why other options had vanished. I kept scrolling in silence, absorbing the scope of it. Dozens of moments where life could have been radically different, all wiped away, file by file. What had looked like failure was really theft, carried out in the plainest, most clinical way possible. Finally, I leaned back, my laptop still open, but my focus shifting away from the screen. If emails were being filtered out this deliberately, what about the rest? Schools don't just send digital notices. They also mail letters, brochures, acceptance packets. And who always managed to reach the mailbox before I did? That question lingered as I closed the laptop. The digital half of the story was now undeniable. I hadn't been rejected at every school. I had been filtered out. But email wasn't the only channel colleges used, and if someone had worked this hard to erase one trail of evidence, it would have been easy to tamper with the other. That thought sat heavier than the anger I already felt. If the inbox was a crime scene, then somewhere nearby another one was waiting. And I already knew who had first access to the source. The mailbox monopoly. Once the email filters exposed how deep this went, my attention shifted to something I had brushed off for years: the mail. All those afternoons pulling into the driveway after school, only to see envelopes already stacked neatly on the counter, suddenly looked different. At the time, it just seemed like routine. He got home first. He grabbed the mail. Big deal. But in hindsight, his eagerness felt almost performative. Some days I'd catch the squeak of the mailbox lid and see him hustling back up the steps before I'd even turn off the car. Who treats the mailbox like a race? Apparently he did, and looking back now, it wasn't about routine. It was control. What stood out was how guarded he became if I happened to walk in while he sorted through the pile. His hands would shuffle faster, skimming the envelopes like a dealer flipping cards. He'd hand me the safe stuff: pizza coupons, credit card offers, while everything else quietly disappeared. At the time, I assumed it was dull, adult mail that didn't matter to me. But after finding the email Sabotage, this daily ritual looked deliberate. He handled the mailbox like it belonged to him, like our house ran on his private delivery service. The U.S. Postal Service dropped it off, but once it landed on our porch, it went through him before it reached anyone else. The real confirmation came the first time I let myself search his office. It was an ordinary afternoon, quiet, empty house. His office wasn't locked, just marked off limits because he said it held important paperwork. I opened the drawers with my pulse pounding, not sure what I'd even find, but determined to know if the missing letters had gone the same way as the emails. And there it was. Not a random loose envelope, not a small stack shoved aside, but a folder, thick, heavy, tucked behind binders. Pulled it open on the floor, and what spilled out made my chest tighten. Several, at least 4 acceptance packets. Envelopes with my name printed across glossy letterhead, some perfectly sealed, others torn open with jagged slits. The kind of mail every high school senior waits months to see. They had been hidden here the entire time. The visual alone was enough to make me dizzy. Different schools, different crests embossed on thick paper, different opportunities I never knew I'd already been given. One had a scholarship letter folded inside, crisp and untouched. Another, opened but shoved back in, included housing forms waiting for a signature. These weren't scraps or duplicates. They were the real thing, the proof that those universal rejections had been invented, and it didn't stop at hiding them. The folder carried his fingerprints in another sense, faint scribbles in the margins, notes he had actually written onto my future. Next to a tuition line, pressed half into the paper, the words, "too expensive." On another, across the bottom corner, the word "nope" underlined twice. And near housing costs, almost casual in tone, waste of money. He hadn't just stolen the chance for me to see these. He had graded them like they were bills he disapproved of. The arrogance was staggering, deciding which futures were too costly to even let me know they existed. Sitting there, I spread the letters around the carpet. It almost looked like a display, a small college fair, curated inside the one room that had always felt off limits. The offers my classmates celebrated over, plastered onto their graduation party posters, were here in front of me, hidden as if they were contraband. Each envelope was two things at once, a door I should have been able to open, and physical evidence of how far he'd gone to keep it closed. I try to imagine his process. Mail slides into the box, he hustles out to snatch it before I can. Bills stay, coupons stay. My envelopes? Straight into his office, filed away like a case against me. He'd even taken the extra step of writing commentary right on the page, like it was his jurisdiction to decide the weight of a scholarship or the worth of a degree program. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't rushed. This folder had been built piece by piece, with confidence I'd never think to look. What made me sick wasn't only the hiding, but also the neatness of it all. Nothing was shoved carelessly. Packets were tucked precisely into the folder, stacked as if categorized. If someone hides something sloppily, it usually means they know it might be discovered. This orderliness meant he never doubted for a second that I'd stay out. That certainty turned my stomach. The evidence was undeniable now. Here, sitting on the carpet under my hands, was confirmation that the strange pep talks, the relentless community college sales pitch, and the two eager mailbox runs all connected. The digital tampering was one layer, but this was physical. Weighty paper and envelopes with my name, literally withheld from me. It stripped away any lingering chance to believe this was misunderstanding, coincidence. I thought about the months I'd spent staring at blank screens and feeling like I was unworthy. Nights I'd convinced myself I wasn't good enough while printing rejection after rejection from my laptop. All the while, proof of the opposite had been locked away in drawers 20 feet from where I cried. That contrast left me dizzy, as if I'd been living in two realities without knowing it, one in which I had failed, and one in which I had succeeded but was never allowed to see it. The longer I sat there, the less it felt like discovery and the more it felt like theft. My future opportunities treated like junk mail, hidden on purpose and annotated like some private ledger he kept. Not because he thought I couldn't handle the truth, but because he didn't like the price tag attached. That folder was his shorthand for my limits. I gathered the packets into a stack and held them tightly, palms sweaty against the paper. Relief wasn't what came. I felt sick. Betrayal always seems abstract until it sits on the carpet in front of you, spelled out in your stepdad's handwriting. What had once been my possible futures were now exhibits in a file, cataloged and stored away as if they were his property. That night, I kept replaying what I'd just found, staring at the stack like it might explain itself. The folder sat heavy in my room, a silent witness to everything I'd suspected but never wanted to be true. I couldn't stop thinking about the smirk he wore each time he circled back to his favorite phrase, community college. Now it wasn't pep talk, it was premeditation, backed by paper evidence. Sitting with those letters, I couldn't let it rest anymore. It wasn't enough to know the truth in silence. It had crossed into something I had to bring into the open, despite how much it scared me. I went to bed restless, but by morning, the decision had formed. If I had spent months living under an invention, then he needed to see what his invention looked like laid bare. The folder I'd uncovered would no longer sit hidden in that office. It would sit somewhere he couldn't ignore. And I knew exactly where that would be. The confrontation. I didn't storm in waving the folder like a TV detective. Instead, I set the kitchen table like a trial. One envelope after another lined neatly in front of him. My name, the crests of schools, the glossy packets stacked like evidence. Next to the letters, I opened my laptop and left the Gmail settings page on the screen, filters and all, ready for him to see. When he walked in, I didn't try for drama. I simply pointed to the table and asked, "Want to explain this?" He froze. For a moment, he didn't sit down. His eyes darted over the envelopes before he grabbed onto the first excuse he thought might work: ignorance. He laughed weakly and said he hadn't even realized those letters were there, mumbling about how they must have mixed in with office paperwork. Then he pushed his fallback line. He was going to talk to me about those. The way he said it gave me chills, like he thought holding onto my mail was so normal he could schedule a reveal whenever it suited him. That was his first defense, flat and unbelievable, and my face must have shown it because he looked away after it left his mouth. I laid it out calmly. The filters weren't a mistake, and unopened college packets don't just wander into a hidden folder. That was when his story bent under pressure. He waved his hand toward the laptop like it was an afterthought. He said he had tweaked a few settings on my email just to filter the noise. His tone was casual, but his shoulders tightened, and his voice dipped quieter. The words didn't even match what sat in front of us. Rules that sent anything with congratulations, accepted, or offer of admissions straight into the trash. I repeated those words aloud, one by one, because I wanted him to hear how absurd his excuse sounded. His eyes flickered at each one, but he kept nodding, acting like it was harmless housekeeping meant to clean my inbox, not erase my future. I couldn't stay calm anymore. I told him straight out his excuses sounded like crumbs on the face denial. Filters this specific don't pop up by accident, and unopened offers don't bury themselves in office drawers. He stopped smiling then. The fake brightness drained off his face, and the mask came down. Finally, he said it outright. He had hidden the mail, and he had filtered the emails. He did it because he thought he was protecting me and the family from wasting money. That was defense number 3. He leaned back, arms crossed, as if proud of his logic. "You'll thank me one day," he said, his voice heavier now, "because I saved you from going into debt." To him, replacing acceptances with silence wasn't betrayal. It was thrift. He dressed sabotage as pragmatism. He even gestured toward the stack and called those universities financial traps that I didn't need. Instead, he said, I should focus on the smarter route, community college. Hearing him claim it was intentional rattled me more than his weak denials. He wasn't even hiding behind confusion anymore. He was trying to own it, to reframe it as a selfless act. My heartbeat was so loud I barely heard myself say, "You lied to me." Every day. 4 months. He didn't flinch. He shrugged like it was all part of reasonable parenting. The quiet arrogance of presenting it as a favor made my skin feel like it was on fire. I asked him why he hadn't trusted my mom with this, why he didn't discuss money openly. He muttered about stress and timing. Always vague, never admitting the deliberate steps. Filters typed out word by word, mail intercepted daily, letters hidden with scribbles in his own handwriting, things you can't spin into oversight. I even pushed one of the letters across the table, showing where he had circled tuition numbers and written "too pricey" in pen. His jaw tightened when he saw it. He didn't try to deny that part. Silence stretched between us. The fridge hummed in the background, but the air felt thick. He broke it by raising his voice slightly, leaning forward like he wanted to turn the tables. He accused me of being ungrateful, insisted I was too young to understand money. "This is why I stepped in," he said. "You would have made the wrong choice." His version of concern was wrapped in control, deciding without giving me a chance, tricking me into believing failure was real while he filed away proof to the contrary. As he spoke, something in me shifted. I realized there was no apology waiting, no real acknowledgement of what this had done to me. All his words bent back to one point. He thought he was right. The cost was my self-esteem, my trust, and my future. things that didn't seem to matter in his equation. His admissions came out not as regret, but as justification. Every sentence turned more hollow the longer he talked. He repeated his mantras about debt, security, and smart choices. But all I could think of was the nights I lay awake feeling worthless, the frustration I carried believing no school wanted me. He had built that illusion piece by piece, while congratulatory letters sat a room away. Nothing fiscally responsible about poisoning your own kid's belief in himself. Nothing protective about erasing every win and manufacturing a fall. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the letters in his face, though I wanted to. Instead, I let the silence say what I couldn't. A pile of envelopes with my name across them. A laptop screen filled with filters he called noise. His handwriting slashed across pages that weren't his to judge. Every piece of evidence stacked against him, louder than anything I could shout. He shifted in his chair again, but this time, there was no new trick to pull. He had shown his hand completely. Denial, deflection, justification. Each broken under the weight of what was laid out on the table. For the first time, he looked cornered, not in control. The confrontation didn't end with fireworks. It ended in quiet certainty. I looked at him and realized the man who had preached smart choices had stolen mine. He had played gatekeeper to my future without an ounce of trust in me or my mom. And now, the truth sat between us where it couldn't be ignored. I gathered the letters carefully into a single stack, keeping the silence heavy on purpose. For once, I didn't fill it with nervous words. He had taken enough of my voice already. I looked at the table again, then at him, and felt the answer settle. This wasn't something I could handle alone anymore, because the next person who needed to see all of this wasn't him. It was her, Mom's reaction. When my mom walked into the kitchen and saw the envelopes lined up across the table, her reaction wasn't relief or immediate anger. It was confusion. At first, she thought I was showing her junk mail or maybe homework disguised as mail. But once I explained what she was looking at, once she realized these were acceptance packets she had never seen before, her face shifted. Her eyes narrowed, her brow furrowed, and confusion gave way to disbelief. She looked at the envelopes like they belonged to someone else, like there had to be an error. Her gaze moved from the letters to me and then to him, searching for a logical explanation that never came. She started asking questions in fragments. Wait, you were accepted here? And here? When? How long ago? Her voice shook, and I could tell she wanted so badly for all of it to make sense, for there to be some reasonable story behind what she was seeing. But then she noticed the writing, eventually an writing that wasn't mine. Notes scratched into the margins of the letters, circling tuition numbers, dismissive phrases like, too pricey. She recognized it immediately. The realization broke her voice. The disbelief drained out of her face, replaced by something deeper, heartbreak. She picked one of the letters up and held it as though it was fragile, wiping at her. Eyes while staring at my name printed neatly at the top. Her words came out soft, almost like she was talking to herself. How did I not see this? That's when her own memories started coming back to her. The way he would rush to the mailbox and bring the stack in before anyone else touched it. How he always seemed too invested in steering me towards staying local. How he brushed off any talk about four-year universities in a tone that wasn't just financial but dismissive. She gave a short, bitter laugh through her tears, muttering, obsessed with the mail, and I thought he just didn't want the dog to get to it. It was like every small habit she had ignored suddenly snapped into a full picture, one she couldn't deny anymore. For a few seconds, it almost felt surreal, like we could laugh together at how ridiculous his scheme was, now that it was out in the open. But no real laughter came. My mom's hands trembled as she shuffled through the packets, her tears falling silently while she checked each school's name as though confirming it was real. Each page she touched was proof not just of sabotage, but of months stolen. And that moment of grief quickly hardened into something sharper. She turned on him, her voice steady but colder than I'd ever heard it. Why would you do this? To him? To me? Her anger wasn't loud, but it cut sharper because of that. She spoke with the weight of betrayal, not just as a mother who had seen her child erased, but as a partner realizing she had been lied to daily.
He had eaten dinner beside her night after night, acting like life was normal, all while hiding a folder 20 feet away packed with her son's future. She repeated herself in different ways. "You lied to us," and "You tampered with both our lives," making it clear this wasn't just about the letters. It was about discovering she had been sharing a home with someone who deliberately buried her child's accomplishments. She kept apologizing to me in between her anger at him. Apologies that came out rushed, almost desperate, that she hadn't noticed, that she had spent months trying to comfort me while unknowingly feeding into a false story. She admitted she trusted him when he argued that expensive universities were a waste because she thought he was trying to protect the family's finances. In her mind, she thought they were on the same team. But she told me something that made her betrayal feel even deeper. She had actually kept a savings account aside for my education, quietly. Years of extra hours and cut corners, all to make sure that tuition wouldn't derail us. She had already been preparing for this long before the applications went out. So hearing him justify his meddling as protecting family money cut her even more. It twisted her effort into something meaningless while erasing me in the process. The realization crushed her. She said it outright, that it made her sick to think about all the nights she had looked at me withdrawn, believing I was heartbroken over rejections, while he sat across the same table knowing I wasn't rejected at all. Her voice cracked when she confessed that betrayed her more than anything else, that he watched me spiral and said nothing, because silence kept his plan intact. She leaned against the counter, her face wet, staring between the letters and him like she was trying to weigh two versions of reality. That fragile heartbreak quickly broke down into outright outrage. She straightened and looked him directly in the eye. When he tried to give his usual excuses about money, about protecting us, about savings, she didn't even let him finish. "Best for who?" she demanded. "Whose money were you protecting? Certainly not his future." Her voice was sharper now, stripped of disbelief. She called it plainly. Sabotaging me wasn't a sacrifice, it was theft, of opportunity, of trust, of dignity. And from that point, there was no waffling. She moved fully to my side. She collected the letters from the counter and held them tightly, then told me in plain words, we would fix this. We would contact every school, one by one. She would be there on the phone with me. She would check every record. She would fight to see what could still be reclaimed. That immediate declaration wasn't about comfort, it was action. For the first time since discovering the folders and filters, someone ordered the chaos into a step forward. She wasn't leaving me to wonder what came next. It became clear watching her that night that she had drawn a line. This wasn't a mistake she could smooth over or something to excuse away with stress or money talk. She told him flatly that this wasn't an argument they could just walk past. Tampering with my future and lying to her about it wasn't a crack in the marriage. It was a break. Her voice stayed steady this time. She said, "This changed everything." And I believed her when she said it. By the end of that night, the emotional arc was complete. She had moved from disbelief to heartbreak to full outrage and then to a plan. She wasn't confused anymore, and she wasn't paralyzed. She knew what she had to do, and her decision brought me the first sense of ground I had felt in months. Standing next to her, with the evidence clutched in her hands, I realized the balance had shifted completely. The lie was no longer mine to carry alone. And with her pushing forward, the weight finally began to shift towards something else, the possibility of undoing at least part of the damage. Options reopened. The morning after the confrontation, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder of hidden envelopes and my laptop open. My mom hovered nearby, steady in a way that made it easier to start. This wasn't about theory anymore. It was about action, finding out exactly which doors were shut for good and which ones I could still pry back open. My process was blunt and unglamorous. I made a list of every school name pulled from the packets, tracked down each admissions phone line, and began dialing, one after another. No victory music, no dramatic rescues, just me sitting there with a pen in hand, praying that hearing my story wouldn't get me laughed off a line or instantly dismissed. The hardest part was starting the conversation. Every introduction felt clumsy.
Hi, I think I was accepted, but didn't reply. Long story. Can you check? It sounded ridiculous, like I was trying to bluff my way back into a party I'd supposedly ignored. On one call, there was a silence long enough that I thought the person had hung up. Then the admissions officer cautiously asked for my name and birthday. I gave it, and moments later she came back with, "Yes, you were admitted, but you never confirmed." Awkward didn't begin to explain how it felt in those pauses. A couple of times, I cracked jokes just to keep breathing. I told one school, "I promise I wasn't ignoring you. I just had someone acting like a human shredder with my good news." One counselor actually chuckled at that, which helped me stop shaking for half a second. But not all conversations went that smoothly. Some schools were unforgiving. One office explained in a clipped, professional tone that their deadline had passed. The class was locked, and waitlists were already in motion. No exceptions. I thanked them anyway, then quietly crossed the name off my list. It stung worse than a fresh rejection, because this time I knew the opportunity had really existed. It wasn't imaginary or out of reach. It had been mine, and it was gone. I forced myself to keep dialing, and that persistence mattered, because soon enough, I hit results that changed everything. One university confirmed I was still accepted without response, and surprisingly, they allowed me to confirm late. I scribbled the words "still open" next to their name and almost cried from relief. Another school told me I could still attend if I deferred to their spring term instead of the fall. That didn't bother me. The idea of starting even a few months later still sounded like a beginning, not a setback. By the end of the day, I had 3 universities officially willing to work with me, either for late enrollment that fall or a spring start date. And then came the discovery that floored me most. One school not only confirmed I had been accepted, but also added matter-of-factly, "You're still eligible for the scholarship awarded with your admission." I repeated the word back to her, "scholarship," like I had misheard. She explained it was partial funding tied to my GPA and community involvement. Sitting at the table, holding the phone tight to my ear, I tried not to cry into the receiver. My stepdad hadn't just hidden my acceptances. He had buried actual financial support, money meant to help my mom and me, because it didn't fit the story he wanted me to believe. That detail broke me open for a minute. I turned to my mom, mouthed the word "scholarship," and watched her shut her eyes against tears. It was the perfect example of how twisted his plan had been. While she had quietly saved for years, he had been erasing offers that would have honored that effort and lightened the burden. By the time I reached the bottom of my list, the outcomes were mixed. A couple of universities were gone for good, their deadlines solid as stone. 3 others said yes, late confirmations or spring starts, and one still had the scholarship attached. The math wasn't neat, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was clear. I hadn't been unwanted. My applications had worked. The rejection story had been false all along. I taped the names of those schools to the wall above my desk. For weeks, that space had been blank, the absence screaming at me every time I saw it. Now, slowly, it filled with possibility again. Not as many as I would have had without sabotage, but enough to know that not all was lost. Enough to know that effort hadn't gone invisible. Looking back, even the strangest parts of the process gave me something. Hours of hold music, clumsy explanations, awkward pauses, they all shifted me into a new role. Instead of the defeated kid who believed he'd been left behind, I was the one making calls, pushing forward, retrieving what had been hidden. Even when the answer was no, I knew I had tried. And when it was yes, it was like stepping into air after weeks underground. The balance was complicated. Frustration sat next to hope. I knew the damage couldn't entirely be repaired. Months of self-doubt were gone forever. Certain scholarships and opportunities were lost. But the story that had kept me awake at night, that I wasn't good enough, that no one wanted me, was shattered. The facts were plain. Multiple schools had chosen me, and some were still willing to stand by that choice despite the chaos. I ended the day slouched in my chair, staring at the taped-up list. The phone was still warm in my hand from the last call. Relief washed in not full, but steady enough to hold. For the first time in months, I could breathe without wondering if I'd been delusional to have dreams at all. The sabotage didn't erase what I had built, it just delayed it. I finally had proof. That moment gave me back something I hadn't realized I lost completely: belief. Not just in the schools, but in myself. The haze of rejection no longer defined me. Options had reopened, and failure was no longer the story. But as my paper wall of second chances grew, something else lingered in the house. Not every person was ready to let go of control. And very quickly I found out that even cornered by the truth, my stepdad had no intention of simply backing down. Final fallout. The fallout came fast and messy. Once the acceptance letters and email filters were exposed, the truth was impossible to contain. But instead of tapering off or apologizing, my stepdad turned bitter. He couldn't erase the evidence anymore, so he resorted to small acts meant to remind me he still had reach inside the house. The first sign was the Wi-Fi. One night, the router just broke. My mom and I both knew it had been working fine for years, but suddenly my laptop couldn't connect. When I asked about it, he shrugged and blamed the service, even though his phone data mysteriously worked just fine. Not long after, my own phone was kicked off the family plan. One morning, I woke up to no service at all. No calls, no texts, no data.
When I confronted him, he said it was part of streamlining expenses. The timing wasn't a coincidence. He had lost control of the colleges, so he targeted what he still could, the access that made my life easier day to day. The gestures were petty but disruptive. They highlighted a switch. He had gone from sabotaging my future to trying to make my present miserable.
When that didn't break me, he pushed further.
At the dinner table one night, during an argument, he raised his voice and told me outright that maybe I didn't deserve to live there if I wasn't willing to make what he called the smart choices. That meant community college. He framed it as though I was the unreasonable one, ignoring that he had spent months hiding my future behind filters and folders. The move was loud, blunt, and meant to scare. Even as he threatened, he clung to the claim that I had unfairly cast him as a villain. He insisted he had only been protecting the family's finances. He told my mom she was blowing it out of proportion, accusing her of being blinded by anger. Then he tried to pin it back on me, hinting that I should feel grateful he had kept me from making mistakes. It was a strange performance, part denial, part self-righteous lecture. He wanted the story rewritten as tough love instead of manipulation. But the envelopes, the filters, and his handwriting in the margins of my packets were all the proof needed. Nothing, he said, could hide the choices he had made. This time, though, his arguments landed flat. My mom's patience was gone. She cut through his excuses in sharp, unshaking words. She said protecting family budgets doesn't require lies, theft, or secret sabotage. She reminded him those letters hadn't just been hidden from me, they were hidden from her. She didn't yell. She used quiet, deliberate sentences that made clear the line had been crossed for good. Her energy that night left no doubt. She wasn't going to waver, and she wasn't going to let him cast me as ungrateful. The more pressure mounted, the more isolated he became. Once family members learned what happened, any sympathy he hoped to retain evaporated. Relatives who normally stayed on the sidelines reached out to us. They didn't question the story. The concrete evidence spoke louder than anything I could have described. What used to be an argument within the house shifted into a clear choice for others watching. My mom and I had acted honestly, and he had not. The loyalty that once supported him quietly drained away. Behind closed doors, he still tried to control the narrative. Sometimes he sulked around, saying no one understood how much he had sacrificed. At meals, he would sit silent and suddenly mutter that people only saw one side. But his words sounded small compared to the documents in front of us. Whenever he tried to wedge himself back into control by lecturing or exaggerating his motives, it only confirmed how far his credibility had collapsed. There was also the question of consequences. One of the clearest pieces of information that came up in the days after was that opening, hiding, or interfering with someone else's mail can be considered a federal crime.
The fact he had been sneaking official university packets addressed to me made that fact weighty. For the first time, my mom and I talked about legal action, not because we wanted to punish for the sake of punishing, but because what he had done wasn't just cruel, it was unlawful. It added a new layer to what had already felt personal, the reminder that this was serious enough to matter outside our walls. The household never recovered after that. My mom stopped engaging with him as if things could ever go back to normal. I overheard her on calls with relatives, her tones steady and final. She didn't wait for apologies that would never arrive. Instead, she started taking steps that signaled she was done maintaining a partnership built on lies. Separation wasn't spelled out in public yet, but the decision hung inside every quiet moment. She no longer included him in plans, no longer softened her words to preserve peace. For her, trust had been broken beyond repair. Looking back, the pettiness of his last tactics only underscored how powerless he had grown. Disrupting Wi-Fi, shutting off a phone line, dangling threats about eviction. These were the leftover weapons of someone who had lost his foothold. The scale of his sabotage had shrunk. The manipulations that once shaped my choices now looked like noise against the louder truth. The evidence had stripped away his authority and left him scrambling. For me, the impact was complicated. I still carried the scars, the wasted months, the rejection letters that weren't real, the chances forever gone because of deadlines. Trust doesn't come back easily when someone you depend on builds a false version of your life and forces you to believe it. But the fallout made one thing certain. The lies no longer belonged to me. They belonged to him, and they crumbled in daylight. The strongest relief came not from revenge or anger, but from seeing the balance restore itself. Family stood beside us. Opportunities had reopened, even if not all. My mom's voice didn't waver when she told him she chose my future over his control. For the first time in months, I could draw a line in my own life and know I wasn't standing on it alone. That's what remained once the dust settled. Not just anger, not just hurt, but the recognition that we had options again. The evidence was undeniable. The support was real. And no matter what small moves he tried to cling to, they couldn't undo the larger truth that had finally broken free. And once the immediate fallout ended, something else became clearer to me. This was never about the letters alone. What happened pointed to something larger than admissions, larger even than the sabotage itself. The bigger lesson. The bigger lesson became clear only after the shock wore off. It wasn't just about one man burying college letters, it was about control. He wanted the authority to shape my choices, to decide what counted as possible, and to keep that grip even if it meant sabotaging me behind my back. On the surface, he hid behind money talk, saying universities were too expensive. But in reality, it was never about tuition charts. It was about control over direction, over independence, and over who got the final word in the house. What stood out to me most was the sheer effort it took. The filters in my Gmail weren't accidental. He had to sit down, type out words like congratulations, accepted, an offer of admission, and set rules so they disappeared before I ever saw them. He had to walk to the mailbox every day, flip through envelopes, and pull out letters addressed to me. That wasn't laziness. It was methodical. If he had used that effort for building his own career, picking up a new skill, or even just fixing things around the house, maybe it could have created something positive. Instead, that energy went into dismantling my future. Understanding that twisted irony made me realize something I'd never really thought about before. Sometimes the people trying hardest aren't working to help you, they're working to limit you. But beyond those realizations, I had to face my own blind spots. I had made it too easy. I gave him the password when he asked for it just in case. I never questioned why he always grabbed the mail first. I didn't treat my email or my mailbox as areas I needed to protect. I thought of them as harmless, like a backpack or a kitchen drawer, personal but not vulnerable. That kind of trust was naive, and it left wide open doors for him to walk through. What I learned painfully is that independence starts with the small things, the accounts connected to your name, the letters sent to your address, the spaces only you should manage. Control those, or someone else might. Looking back, there are a few lessons I know I'll carry with me, and ones I think are useful for anyone trying to avoid what I went through. First, keep control over your own accounts and mail. Don't share logins. For convenience, even with people who sound believable when they say it's just in case. If I had done something as simple as setting my applications through an email only I had access to, the sabotage would have been harder, maybe even impossible. Second, when something feels off in your inbox, don't shrug it away. Check your filters, check your trash, check for keywords. If I had searched my settings earlier, I would have seen the filters for words like congratulations, accepted, and offer of admission. I thought the rejections told the whole story, but the truth was waiting in the folders I never looked in. That's a habit worth building. If the pattern doesn't make sense, dig into the details before assuming you failed. And third, when money becomes a weapon in the conversation, set boundaries and get documentation. My stepdad framed sabotaging me as protecting the family's finances, but it wasn't about support, it was about control. My mom eventually opened her own account dedicated to my education, separating it entirely from him. That step gave her back security and took away one of his levers. Having money prepared doesn't just make opportunities possible, it prevents others from using finances as an excuse to shrink your choices. These things might sound simple, but they change the whole dynamic. They draw a line between trusting someone and handing over control of your future. There's a difference. Trust in relationships is earned through transparency and consistency, not demanded through access to passwords or ownership over mail. I thought letting him in on those little things was practical. In reality, it gave him the exact tools he needed to shut me out of some of the most important opportunities I had ever worked for. There's also a deeper piece of the lesson, how easily money can be twisted into justification. He repeated saving and avoiding waste until it sounded reasonable, even caring. But that language hid the real intent, deciding what was too costly without ever asking me or even telling me the offers existed. Watching that unfold taught me that financial arguments can sometimes mask control. It's not always about frugality, it's about who gets to call the shots. Recognizing that pattern early matters, especially when you're preparing for independence. If someone always talks about money in ways that close doors instead of opening conversations, that's not guidance, it's control. When I think about the aftermath, the strangest part isn't the missed deadlines or the lost months. It's how close I came to believing his version of my life completely. For weeks, I carried the story that I was rejected everywhere. Every decision I made during that time, what to tell friends, how to answer questions about the future, how to think about myself, was shaped by that false narrative. And that's the damage sabotage really does. It doesn't just take away the opportunities, it rewrites your identity while you're still forming it. Still, despite the damage, learning this bigger lesson had a kind of payoff. My mom and I shifted how we handled trust in the house. I stopped treating access to my accounts as something casual. She stopped brushing aside his financial arguments without asking for transparency. We both learned to pay closer attention, and in that closeness, our relationship actually grew stronger. In losing trust in him, we strengthened trust between us. That new balance gave us the foundation to move forward, and for me, the first real sense that I could claim independence without asking permission. Yes, some opportunities were forever gone, and those months of self-doubt can't be erased. But the reset gave me something else, a framework. I understood that putting boundaries around your information, your choices, and your finances isn't selfish, it's survival. Protecting the basics can prevent someone from inventing an alternate version of your reality. That's the bigger lesson I take from all of this. It wasn't only about admissions. The real message was about ownership of choices, guarding independence, and not giving anyone the keys to rewrite your story from the background. The envelopes, the filters, the hidden folder. All of those were symbols of what happens when you stop guarding your doors. When I look back now, the strange humor is that he spent more energy filtering Gmail than I ever did studying calculus. But the laughter fades when I remember how deeply it hurt to live inside the lie he built. The part that endures isn't the sabotage itself, but what it taught me about agency. I got some of my options back, but the real win was reclaiming the right to decide and learning how to close those open doors so no one else can quietly step in again. And that realization left me with one last thought, because as powerful as rejection can feel, there's something even harder to spot when it comes from people close to you. Rejection hurts, but being sabotaged is different because it's
dishonest. It rewrites your story without your knowledge.
the only real defense is keeping control of what belongs to you, your accounts, your mail, and your choices. Guard them closely so no one else can quietly steer your future. If you've ever been undermined, or if someone tampered with your mail or accounts, share your experience in the comments. And drop one tip you use to protect your logins and information, because others can learn from it. In the end, the most powerful feeling isn't revenge. It's reclaiming agency and knowing your future is back in your own hands.